Welcome to Startup Hacks, a We Global podcast. We explore the stories and secret strategies that women entrepreneurs use to save time and money when bootstrapping and building their businesses. I'm your host, Fernanda Carapinha. Welcome back to another episode of Startup Hacks. I'm your host, Fernanda Carapinha, and today I am excited to welcome Nicola Stephenson. Nicola is one of the co-founders of oHHo, a cannabis wellness brand where she leads all marketing and partnership initiatives for the business. Nicola is also the founder of Free, which works with clients in medtech, the hospitality space, and the women's movement. In 2018, she founded a nonprofit called It's a Thing that raises awareness and money for head and neck cancer. Nicola, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, my pleasure. Really great to be here chatting to you today.
Thank you. So I'm so excited to have this discussion with you because I love what you're doing and such an interesting story. But before we begin, I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of context and paint a little bit of the background of from which you come, where you were raised, how you got started in your professional journey.
Of course. So I grew up in a small town in the north of England, and my parents didn't marry. I was a product of their wild affair, which is really a whole book for another time, or that's a gin and tonic when we get the chance. And so, but normal is just your normal, right? So I think up until the age of sort of 6 or 7, my, environment was just my environment. I adore, both of my parents. And, as you get a little bit older, people make decisions that are right for them, and not to dwell too much on that. But my mum came from a very, humble background. My dad came from a very working class background in Liverpool, one of 7 children. He grew up, with no money, and used to tell us, stories of not having glass in the windows, and to which we would all get out our tiny violins, as you can imagine. And he really was completely self-made. He was not stupid, he was sharp, he was streetwise, and he was a serial entrepreneur. So my childhood was, one day we were packing up posters for computer games, and the next day we were sending out brochures for a kitchen business. And some days there were money, some days there wasn't any money, some days we could pay the school fees, some days we couldn't. And but it was a great a great experience, and just how I so working for someone was sort of a very strange concept for me, as you can imagine. My father had this just flexibility of really doing whatever he wanted. So I studied at school, went to college, studied journalism, and then I moved to London. And my tutor said, "You'll never get a job in journalism, you're not tough enough." And so I ended up in the communications field, and I started there. And after a couple of years, at that time, the industry was very segmented into really direct marketing, but through the mail, no social media, PR, communications, corporate communications, and then advertising, which was the holy grail of everything. And it was a very exciting time, because as I entered the industry in sort of early 2000s, YouTube had just been invented, and all of these new blogging was a thing. And so I went out on my own after a couple of years and started my first agency.
Wow.
So that sort of was how I got going. I think I borrowed £10,000 from my dad, who frankly may or may not have had it, depending on the day. But that day he had it. So I borrowed some money from him, which I repaid. And the great thing about the agency business is you can start it with very little resource. You just need a computer and a phone, really.
And was that scary for you to start your business with a loan from your dad?
I think that at the time, when you're in your 20s, what was I, like 25? I think you're so unaware of what could possibly go wrong. So, I just looking back, how anyone gave us any business, I have no idea. Um, and of course, your family is totally useless. My mother still doesn't know what I do. I love her very much, but she, is still, what are you doing again, darling? So, but the people around, that you build relationships with, mentors, they all kind of come into play. So I think I remember having a meeting with an accountant and he said, I'll be amazed if you're in business after a year.
Wow.
But, I don't think I realized the consequences.
I just have to add a little personal tidbit to that. Having been born in Portugal, and in Portugal, there's only a handful of occupations that really are commonly discussed beyond kind of basic jobs, and that's lawyer, doctor, etc. So given that I was in the entertainment business, my mother could never really explain to people what I did because I was developing TV shows, and that was just foreign to them. So she just resorted to telling everybody that I was a doctor, and I never understood when I would walk the streets. They would be like, Doutora Fernanda, and I was like, why does everyone think I'm a doctor? So that's just so funny.
Amazing.
So let's talk a little bit about so you started your business. It obviously took off and grew because you stayed in the entrepreneurial kind of life for a long time. And then how did you transition from the marketing area to your current business?
So around about 5 years ago, I had moved to the US to really grow our agency business here. And agency businesses are wonderful, but they are so people oriented. And I had a bit of an intervention. I became unwell and I had to come out of the business for a little time. And when I returned, I sort of had a different relationship to it. I can't really explain, not in a negative way, but by this time the company was 200 people. It's a well-oiled machine and it's running. And, I think what you learn about yourself is what you're, better at and not so good at. And, what I probably really learned through that period was I'm a horrible manager. I never finish anything. But if you want something started, I'm your person, And so I found myself in financial meetings and this and that. And, it was just not really, I was, I'm passionate about practicing communications and brand marketing, but I really fell out of love with running the company at that time. Mm-hmm. And we sold it and, it did not go well. My first exit was a complete, a lesson in exiting,
really?
Which, happens. And the more people you speak to, the more, and that is an experience to share another time. But, we sold the company and, you lose control at that point. And so, we were not aligned with our new partners ultimately. And so I left. And so I ended up in my non-compete. So I couldn't start another agency. And my husband and I had invested in a marijuana company. A couple of friends were setting up back in 2018. And my husband, who was in the restaurant business and the music industry, was just like, this is the industry. He was just so excited about it. We went to a dispensary in LA. I had never taken any drugs, so this was a whole new world. And it was just sort of, you could feel the energy, around the business. And so what was amazing about my exit kind of going wrong, I guess, is, when a company is 200 people, it's very hard to change it or move it around or, whereas we suddenly had this time period in our lives where we could start something new. And so we started oHHo with James's best friend, Tim, who's in the UK.
And so tell us about oHHo.
So James and Tim went on a, car adventure across America looking for this, ideal in their mind, sun-grown, beautiful hemp plants. And what they found were, very large operators. The Farm Bill had recently come in, not really great farming practices, a lot of rubbish in the market, and we would call it snake oil, pricing structures all over the place, complicated, people charging you $200 for something that's got 20 milligrams of CBD in it. It was really unsophisticated. And the generation, I think, in their 40s and 50s with a lot of, business experience was, I think, quite afraid and skeptical of the industry. And that's changing, but very slowly. And so it was really full of chances and, a lot of people who were, getting high, which is fine, obviously, but it's not, it was not run, it did not run properly as a business. So, they really felt strongly about having, sustainable products, clean products that were fully transparent. Where were the growers that had come from the marijuana space that really knew how to grow these plants and extract them in the right way? And so we set off on our search for those farms and those farmers, and slowly we found our first farm in upstate New York and one in Colorado. And we noticed this idea of terroir, like wine or cheese, depending on where it's grown. There are different appellations. And so we started creating oils with independent growers and farmers. And what we, our mission is to kind of build this, fantastic network of grown in America, farmers, and bring their products to market, but to a certain standard that the consumer can really connect with and understand.
Interesting. So can you repeat that again? Did you say terroir?
Oh, terroir. It's a French, so Terroir. It's like, how do you say? It'll be my English accent. So just the
high fashion pret-a-porter, or however it's pronounced.
Right. Just where, where grapes are grown, it creates a completely different product, and no single plant is the same. So I used to work on for LVMH and Krug, and that the Krug vintage is a blend, and so they're blending different vintages from different years, and so it never tastes the same, and so the sense that people were applying just this, put CBD in everything and give it to your dog, felt like it was a little bit more sophisticated than that, perhaps.
So so if I understand you correctly, you're developing your CBD oils, specifically in this case, almost like fine wines from different regions of the country.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's pretty unique, no? For your industry?
I think, I think there are certain, smaller growers who really, certainly hold the same values, but I don't think anyone's really tackling it at a brand level in the way that we are. And like wine, sometimes when it's very good, it runs out, and then another year you might not get the same crop. And so you need the flexibility and the consumer understanding to be able to explain that. And so we came across that idea, if we just didn't want to go to a big manufacturer and, buy a bunch of plants. We wanted to really, look at how we could support consumers, how we could support, farmers, how we could support communities, because hemp growing is a really wonderful regenerative opportunity for farming communities. And so there's been a lot of struggle where farmers have grown hemp, great hemp, and it's gone to waste. So, finding the right growers and collaborating just felt like a much more natural approach.
And so tell us a little bit about your product offerings that you've been developing.
We started with oils, so a tincture that you take, you ingest, and we felt very strongly that needed to be what we call full spectrum, and that is meaning that we use the whole plant, including a little bit of THC, but within the FDA regulations. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you get what is called the entourage effect. So you get all of the benefits. And so we wanted to really make a product that, when you take it, you feel like it's working for you, because I think part of what was happening in the industry was, people were buying oils, for a lot of money and not feeling any effect. And so, you're then like, well, it's kind of like taking cod liver oil. Maybe it's working, maybe it's not, Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. we set about really focusing on making the highest potency, most effective oils that we could. So we started there. And then as we started giving it to friends to try, people started putting it on their skin. And, a friend of mine in Chicago was using it for repetitive strain. Another friend of mine with very dry skin was using it as her face, regime. And I must admit, I have been a little skeptical about the beauty rush in a way. But, I said to James and Tim, I think there's something, here. And so we have developed a balm, and we are developing a hand cream. We're developing a sunscreen. And we just also started working with a chef on pastilles, so gummies, and just starting to, be a bit more, extend our product line. But the three oils were really our core products, and now we're starting to develop, very slowly and carefully, but some things in response to what people tell us they want.
Interesting. So I would imagine that there probably are startup hacks that you would apply perhaps differently in this particular industry than maybe you would just globally if you were starting a startup, because I know that since it's a new industry, there's probably certain unique challenges that you have to be a little bit more strategic with. But if you were to pinpoint kind of 3 go-to startup hacks that you used in launching this business that you think are really key, important strategies, whether it be time management or self-care or leadership-oriented or, how to best position your product or service, what would you say those are?
Well, it's such a great question, because this was a very different business for me to come into, and I was always complaining about what possibly my clients could be doing and why they weren't returning my calls. And now I feel like marketing is at the bottom of the list, which is not where it should be, obviously. This one is going to sound obvious, but you just have to believe in the product. And if it's not good enough, go back to the drawing board and start again. And 2 weeks before we, put the brand out there, we ripped up all of our identity and started again. Wow. And so I think that, you can evolve, you can change, but if you don't start with a great product that you can believe in and stand behind, particularly in this industry, it's very difficult because there's a lot of noise. And, people say, oh, why are you getting into the CBD space? It's really crowded. And I'm like, that's like someone saying, why are you getting into the alcohol industry? It's sort of so huge. And so I think that having a great product, having a product you believe in, really understanding and being able to explain it to other people is really important. There's so much education needed. And I'm sure it's true of many things, but spend the time, looking for the right things, and you'll know when you have it.
Mm-hmm. Very good. What else would you suggest?
The other thing that I found really great about oHHo is, and maybe it's COVID and the pandemic and people having more time being at home in some ways, is, collaborating. And we've collaborated with, other startups, companies who are a little bit bigger than ours, joined forces to create collaborations, and it feels like a lot of work and it can feel like a distraction, but if you can use other people's audiences to bring people into your world, that can be very powerful. There's 9 billion websites on the internet, so you're not going to get discovered easily. And so in our industry, we can't advertise on social, we can't advertise on Google, so we're very restricted. And so, I found that, using people's, brand equity, partnering and doing things in a different way has been really wonderful. And then the other thing I would just say is, never be afraid to pick up the phone and ask for help of anyone, when you're really beginning, it's people will hit you back, and you just got to get amongst it.
And did you find that if you were still working in your agency, that the hacks that you're just suggested would be slightly different?
I think yes, I think they would be. Yes, I think in the agency business, you're much more people oriented, and so having that team, understanding how you can produce work, particularly in this new world, from a digital infrastructure point of view, I think there would certainly be different things. But for this business specifically, some things are a crossover for sure. Being flexible, keeping going. Nothing is perfect. I certainly think are true for both. But there's definitely a difference between starting a product, a consumer brand, than starting a consultancy.
Okay, so now I have one last question because unfortunately we're starting to run low on time. So here we go. If you could wave a magic wand, what one thing that drives you crazy do you wish someone would find a solution for that would help your productivity and sanity?
Oh, that's so good. I think if someone could give me omnipresence, so I could be with my kids, make dinner, be in my business, all at the same time, that would be magic.
Oh my gosh, I hear you. I would sign up for that service tomorrow.
Was I allowed to have an unreasonable goal there, or did it have to be practical?
No, not at all. I mean, let's face it, this is all science fiction. I'm sure 5 years from now there'll be some solution. I don't know what it'll be called, like virtual nanny. I have no idea.
Perfect.
But I think for entrepreneurs it's a real issue, right? We suffer from that in my own household, where when you're fully immersed, it's hard to sometimes disconnect because you love what you do and you have other responsibilities. So it's always such a balancing act.
Yes, I think that's true. And just very quickly, I know we're running tight on time, but one of my mentors, Juliet Tim, said to me, being an entrepreneur, and it's such great advice, is really an illusion. There are 50 balls in the air, and you just have to make sure the top 5 are moving at any one time, and that the one that's about to go horribly wrong, you pick up before it hits the floor.
Yes.
And so I think that is, not putting too much pressure on yourself and being able to create the illusion is something to just, there's no way you can get across it all. No way you can complete everything. No one can do that. But, focus on the important things and catch the disasters before they happen.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. And sometimes they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Nicola. It was awesome to have you on the show. And I think a lot of your insights were fabulous, and also such an interesting industry that a lot of people don't really have an inside knowledge about. So thank you for sharing that. And if anyone would like to learn more about your company and if they're interested in your products, where should they go?
They can go to weareoho.com. And my email is nicola@weareoho.com. So if anyone wants to hit me up directly, my pleasure.
So I want you to spell oHHo because I want to make sure people land on the right place.
Yes, of course. So it's weareohho.com.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. That was another episode of Startup Hacks. Please tune in next week where we have an opportunity to spend another quality period of time with another great founder who will be sharing her journey and her startup hacks. We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining Startup Hack. Tune in next week for more interviews. We have another great show you won't want to miss on the secret female founder strategies that can save you time and money when building your business. This podcast is brought to you by Women Entrepreneurs Global, the first startup studio and digital do-it-yourself startup platform for women. For more information on our guests, this podcast, and many other female founder programs, please visit womenentrepreneurs.global. I'm your host, Fernanda Carapinha. See you next week.